Hi, I put this wig on this morning and realised that I look like my mother. It happens to all of us. So I am here today to talk to you about my favourite books of 2021 so far. These are not all books that have been published this year, but at least three of them have been published this year, and a couple of others were published towards the end of last year. Let me get some stats up for you, because don't we all love some stats? I can tell you what my reading year has looked like so far. I'll link my story graph in the description box down below if you're interested in following me over there. I don't post reviews over there at all. I literally just use it as a way to chronicle my reading, and all reviews that I do are either here or the ones that I do on the radio or when I write for other places. How do I see my stats? Here we go. Pie charts. We gotta love a pie chart. Okay, so I am filming this a couple of weeks into July, but whatever. So I have read 70 books so far this year with a total of 16,423 pages. And then this is my pie chart here for mood reading. So my most read mood is reflective, emotional and mysterious, and I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that my least read genres are hopeful, funny and relaxing. I also have apparently quite an even split between slow, medium and fast-paced books for this year. I think because I've been reading more crime and thrillers than I normally would, so it's kind of split it more evenly. And again, probably not a surprise that my page number count, most books are under 300, and then with 300 to 499 being the second most popular, and then very few books over 500, because most of the stuff that I read is literary fiction, poetry collections, short story collections, and those tend to be on the shorter. And we have a split here of fiction and non-fiction, where just over 3/4 of the books that I have read have been fiction, but again, that's encompassing poetry and stuff as well, and there's no separate genre for that in this particular pie chart. So anyway, I have read 70 books so far this year, and I have picked 10 to speak to you about today. And I did and about putting them in an order, and I've kind of done that, but really it's arbitrary. So take the order with a pinch of salt, but know that all of these books do deserve to be in that top 10 listing. Right, so first one I'm going to talk to you about, and I will list all of the books in the description box down below, is Still Life by Josie George. This is a beautifully written memoir, and it feels very photographic because Josie is focusing in on small little details and then elaborating on those and taking the time to observe things that maybe other people are just not observing. In this, she's talking about what parenting is like as someone who is disabled, who has a chronic illness, a series of chronic illnesses which doctors have diagnosed as various different things over the years. So it is focusing on nature and photography, love and creativity, and I just found it so comforting, especially because it is split across the seasons, which I thought was a wonderful way of cataloguing everything that she was observing. And it has a lovely focus on female friendship as well, which is something that I always like to read about. So that is the first one. Next up is one that I read last month. This is The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Deesha Philyaw. I didn't love every single story in this collection, but the ones that I loved were some of the best short stories that I have ever read. This is a collection about 9 different women, none of whom know each other, so it's not an interlinking short story collection, but 9 women who go to church or are questioning their faith, but are tied to faith in some way or other. And they have been led to feel shame about their desires and their sexuality, and it's about them discussing that either with themselves or with the people that they love. There's a lot of queer representation in here, and I just thought it was fantastic. The best story in this is one called Peach Cobbler, which is about a teenage girl who believes that her pastor is God because her mum makes him a peach cobbler every week, and she thinks that her mum is having an affair with God. But as this goes on, she comes to realize that no, this is a man, and her mum is flawed, and the pastor is flawed, and does that mean that religion is flawed, and what should she value, and should she believe this man now when she watches him every Sunday stand at the pulpit and preach about honesty? She just feels really, really conflicted, especially because she loves her mum dearly and can appreciate that her mum is doing this because she wants to put food on the table and have electricity in their house, but at the same time, it just feels like a form of betrayal. I really, really enjoyed this book. Next is one that I read right at the beginning of the year, and this is Disability Visibility by Alice Wong. This has definitely been doing the rounds on BookTube, especially during Disability Readathon in April, which was a joy to see. I said this is by Alice Wong, but it's edited by Alice Wong, and there are so many different disabled voices in here talking about their personal experiences, so much intersection going on, which is fantastic. And my favourites in the collection were essays by Ariel Henley, and she has a book of her own coming out later this year, which I am so excited to read about. She was talking about facial disfigurement, and the first essay in here was also a favourite of mine, which is called Unspeakable Conversations by Harriet McBride Johnson, and that is talking about eugenics and about presenting herself, talking about disability in front of a lecturer who basically believes that she should have been killed when she was born. And it is such a difficult read, and she is like so incredibly articulate and wonderful, and I have such love for her in my soul. And I also have her book on my shelf as well, which is Too Late to Die Young, I think is what it's called. So I'm going to be reading that later this year, but this is really, really, really brilliant. That was a lot of reallys. A book that I listened to, in fact, we've got 2 here that I have listened to. So this is Passing by Nella Larsen, and I read this because I wanted to read the book that The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett is based on, which I read last year and really loved. So I picked up Passing because that is what The Vanishing Half is based on, and I actually ended up loving this a whole lot more than The Vanishing Half, which is still an absolutely wonderful book. So this is a book about racism and colorism in the 1920s, and it's about 2 friends who see each other again as adults, and one of them has passed over and is living as a white woman hiding her past, and the other friend is not, and she has married a black man, and she is very proud of who she is. And even though they come from a very similar place, they're now so very different, but have the urge to connect with each other and bond. This is obviously really dangerous for both women. Claire, who is the one who has passed over, is married to a very racist white man, and she kind of underestimates the danger that she's putting herself in, but also the danger she's putting her friends in too. I do wonder if Tennessee Williams read this book, because it has a lot of a similar vibe to A Streetcar Named Desire, which obviously came much later and isn't about racism, but Stella and Blanche, 2 sisters in this case, who come back together, and one of them has put on all these airs and is pretending to be somebody that she isn't, and is envious of the life that she left behind, but at the same time doesn't want to return there. So if you enjoyed A Streetcar Named Desire, I think you would like this even more. I listened to the audiobook, which is narrated by Tessa Thompson. I think there are quite a few different versions, and I think Tessa is in a new film of Passing, which is coming out, or has just come out. I'm not sure, but I'm looking forward to seeing that whenever that is available. The other book that I listened to on audio was Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. This is, to be honest, now I've picked it up, I think probably it should be higher up the list and not midway through. But it's hard because I only read this last month, and I think you need a bit of distance from books before they kind of settle. But this one is funny, outrageous, and also dark and disturbing and gross. The author wrote at the front of this, "For my mother and father, please don't read this." And I can see why Eliza wrote that at the beginning. And she narrated the audiobook herself, and I felt extra love for that because I'm from Sunderland, she's from Newcastle, this is set in Newcastle. She read it obviously in her Geordie dialect, and I just felt like I was listening to a little bit of home, but a really sadistic, awful, funny piece of home. The main character in this book is called Renee, and she did art at university, specifically photography, now works in a bar, does photography in her spare time, gets paid a lot of money from some very questionable clients who are really into sadistic photographs of naked men, and men that she essentially pulls off the streets. She is playing with the male ego. She has been mistreated by men herself, and there's a lot of revenge stuff going on in here. I would say this is a great mashup of The Dumb House by John Burnside and Promising Young Woman, the film that came out earlier this year. If you liked Promising Young Woman, then you will definitely like this. Trigger warnings for sexual assault, eating disorders. There's a lot of stuff going on in here, and it is so twisted and delightful, and I would recommend the audiobook massively. Know that it will make you cackle as well. The next book on my list is 50 Sounds by Polly Barton. A very different book. So this is about Polly, it's a non-fiction book, it's about Polly going to Japan, learning Japanese and what that's like. And it was really interesting to chat to Polly, which I did after reading this. I interviewed her for an article that I was writing, and we talked about gaps in language, rewriting of the self when you're writing memoir, and how that has a lot of similarities with translation work as well. How she thinks of translation work as being like a midwife of books, because you're helping birth it in a different language and you're working with its DNA. And it was a joy to chat with her. So I won't speak about this book very much here, but I will link the interview that I did with Polly in the description box down below. And if you like the kind of things that she's saying in that interview, then I recommend picking up this book, because I think you will enjoy it. Next on this pile is an author who appeared in my favourites video, not last year, but the year before, which was Barbara Noble. I read a book of hers that was published by Persephone called Doreen, and it was a delightful story about a girl called Doreen who was evacuated from London during the Second World War, and about how the family that she went to stay with really wanted to keep her, but she had this fraught relationship with her mother, which wasn't always brilliant, but she was her mother. It was really cozy, but also complicated in the best way. And I feel exactly the same way about this book here, which is called The House Opposite. And this is published by DSP, who I have never heard of before. Dean Street Press. Barbara wrote this during the Blitz, and I'm not a huge fan of reading World War II books, but I think ones that are written by people who experienced it, I will definitely make time for. I just don't like the romanticization of it that some writers do, these days. Book written during that period from someone who went through it, yes, please sign me up. I would like to read that. This is a novel about a woman called Elizabeth, who is a secretary, and cliche, she's having an affair with her married boss, and the Blitz is a little bit of an inconvenience to that. Sometimes it actually helps, because at one point the boss's wife is evacuated from London, and that's helpful. But mostly this book is about how the war, and the Blitz in particular, is an inconvenience to the lives of the characters within this book, the lives that they would be living whether or not there was a war on anyway. It's how we can rationalize and normalize trauma over extended periods of horrific times, because we can't keep our adrenaline levels up here consistently. So I thought this was a very accurate portrayal of what life during the Blitz would probably be like from someone who did live through it. Is especially about privilege during the Blitz and how you can ignore a lot of things and perhaps put yourself in more dangerous situations if you think that stuff is just never going to happen to you. I think the attitude transcends class, but it's definitely more prevalent in this book in the upper classes, who were just so used to life, ending up going their way, kind of. There are some really good discussions about queerness in here, which was a pleasant surprise for a book written in the 1940s. And I love that. It wasn't particularly overt, but I thought it was very sensitively handled. I enjoyed it. It's cozy, but also horrific, and does touch on the horror of the Blitz, but it's more like a numb pulse all the way through, because that's how the characters have felt about it, having lived through it for a prolonged period of time. Next on my list, we have two books that kind of complement each other a little bit. This is a middle grade called Show Us Who You Are by Elle McNicoll, and this is a brilliant book which I discussed with Elle during her book launch, because I was hosting that with her, and I think that event is still available online. If it is, I will link it in the description box down below. I adored Elle's first book, which was called Kind of Spark. It was on my favourites books of last year, and this one I think is even better. This is a brilliant own voices neurodivergent book, and the protagonist, Cora, is an autistic girl who makes friends with a boy called Aiden, who is the son of the owner of this huge company called Pomegranate, who are making holograms of people. And Cora is so fascinated by this technology, and she wants to get involved and learn all about it, but the deeper that she digs, the more eugenics type stuff she unearths, and it is such a wonderful commentary and such I mean, I think the word powerful is thrown around quite a lot. Trust me, this is a very, very powerful book, and it will also make you howl. There was one point when I was reading this book that I just thought, I'm never going to speak to Elle ever again. No, thank you. No, this book is brilliant, and it will make you feel all of the things, and it has a Black Mirror type feel to it. And I said that it shares some similarities with this one because of that Black Mirror feel, but in other ways they're very, very different, and this is definitely for grown-ups and not for middle grade. So this is Universal Love by Alexander Weinstein, and this is a series of stories that looks how specific elements of technology could be expanded on, misused, and be detrimental to our humanity. It's a really intense, kind of scary thing to read, because some of the things in here are not that far from where we are right now. I really enjoyed his first book, which was Children of the New World. Again, this one is even better. One of my favorites from this book, which I think I talked about in my wrap up, is I think the first one, which is about a woman who has passed away, and then all the members of her family, like with Elle, Show Us Who You Are, want to have a hologram of her to remember her by, so that they can continue to interact with her and lessen their grief. But each family member cherry picks what they want to remember about the person that they have lost. So even though there are, say, I don't know, 10 holograms of this person knocking around, they're just not the same person. So the sister wants to remember something different. The daughter wants to remember something different. Obviously, the husband remembers something else of her entirely. And it's just a wonderful look at how people, yes, are very different depending on who they happen to be interacting with, but also how when someone dies, we do misremember them, and we want to keep them really pristine in our brains. Not always, but we definitely do that with some people, and there are just some parts that we want to forget about and push aside, and it questions whether or not that's right. There's a lot to do with dating in here as well, AIs. It's so good. Really, really, really recommend that one. And then the last book is a Nicci French book, because would any video of mine be complete without me talking about Nicci French? This is the best book of theirs that I have read so far this year. I also read a great one in July, but I felt like I couldn't include it because it's after the halfway mark, but I'll tell you about that one in a wrap up soon. I still think this one is my favorite out of those two. So this is Losing You, which I think actually has a terrible cover, but don't be put off by the cover. This is such a brilliant book. This is about a woman called Nina who is getting ready to go on holiday with her family. She broke up from her husband a few years ago. They don't really have a great relationship. They have 2 kids who live with Nina, and she has a new partner, and the kids and her new partner and her are about to go on holiday to Florida. She's getting ready, packing. Her son's really excited. Her daughter was at a sleepover the night before, was going to go from that sleepover to do her paper round, then come back to pack. The daughter's really excited to go to Florida as well, and Nina's partner is on his way from London to pick them up to go to the airport. But it approaches the time when they should be setting off, and her daughter, Charlie, has not come home. She is really worried about this, and she calls around. No one has seen her since the night before. She calls the police. They don't care because it's only been a couple of hours and she's a teenager. They think she's probably just, somewhere doing something she probably shouldn't. But her mum knows that can't be the case because she was so excited to go on holiday. So this is set over the course of one day. It is one woman's quest to find her daughter, and you will not be able to put this book down. I read it in 2 sittings, so I clearly did put it down. But I had to go to sleep. I'm sorry, I also value sleep. If I'd started reading this at the beginning of the day, I don't think that I would have put it down, and I think I would have read it all in one go. It's just one of those books where there's something extra always happening, each chapter ending on a cliffhanger, so Moorish. I absolutely inhaled it, and there were so many potential suspects, and I did guess what was going on in this book, but I think the authors wanted you to, and I say authors because this is a husband and wife writing duo. There is a point in the story where I think you are supposed to kind of be ahead of Nina and guess what's going on, but that only increases the tension because she hasn't joined the dots yet. And my heart at that point was quite possibly dangerous, actually, how fast my heart was pumping. I loved it. Bear in mind, if you happen to get this edition, that the last 40 pages are the first 3 chapters of an entirely separate book. So for me, when I was getting close to the end, even though it seemed to be, you know, all wrapped up, I was like, oh my God, there's going to be another twist because there are 40 pages left. And there wasn't. It was the beginning of a new book, and that slightly, you know, deflated me for a while. Bear that in mind. Don't do what I did and assume that something else is going to be happening. It's a great book. So those are the 10 books that I would say are my favourites from this year. And some of these are books that I think are technically brilliant. Some of them are books that have particularly moved me. Some are comforting in what I needed at that particular time. These are favourites for a whole number of reasons. And I think there's something in here for lots of different kind of readers. So I hope that something takes your fancy, piques your interest. As I said, I will list the titles in the description box down below if that happens to be helpful. If you are new here, I would love you to subscribe. We talk about books a lot on this channel. And by we, I mean, you know, me. I don't know why I'm talking about myself as if I am more than one person. I am going to disappear now. I would love to know what your favourite books of the year so far have been. Let me know in a comment down below, and I will speak to you very soon. Sending lots of love. Bye.